Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is a really critical analysis of some pedagogical choices we see in language learning material. Specifically, we're looking at a script for A1-A2 learners that's all about, well, the topic of clothes.
Right, and this material is a perfect case study, isn't it? It really gets at that fundamental tension in designing a curriculum for beginners. How much structure is actually helpful, and at what point does it just become stifling?
Absolutely. And that brings us to our central question. Does the script really tight control over vocabulary, its use of these simple formulaic sentences? And this is key. Its inclusion of explicit instructions like calls to action. Does all that provide the best path to confidence? Or does it oversimplify things to the point that it limits the learner from engaging with the subject in a more complex way?
And before we dive into the main topic, please take a moment to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, like this podcast, and leave a comment to support the channel. Your engagement truly helps.
And, that very instruction is a perfect place to start. I'm going to argue that this highly structured, very functional approach, the rigid categories, the focus on basic verbs, and yes, even those transactional instructions, is actually the necessary and maybe even the optimal path for a beginner to gain confidence and practical skills.
See, I come at this from a completely different angle. I'd argue that this level of rigid structure, especially when you mix in things that are, purely transactional and have nothing to do with the actual subject, it sacrifices crucial depth. It models a really artificial way of communicating that I think actually hinders the transition to more natural, authentic speech.
I can see why you'd call it rigidity, but for an A1 or A2 learner, the main goal isn't really nuance. It's utility. It's momentum. I mean, this script is, I think, expertly designed to prevent cognitive overload. It provides essential scaffolding by taking a huge topic, clothing, and breaking it down into these small, manageable, functional silos. Just look at the material. You've got these really clear, separated sections, clothes for different weather, talking about colors, clothes for different activities. This segmentation, it ensures the vocabulary is immediately actionable. It's contextualized in a simple way. And more than that, the material focuses on core action verbs: wear, put on, take off. These are the grammatical tools a learner needs to perform high-utility tasks right away. This methodical, focused buildup of simple patterns is, I think, just the fastest and safest route to building that foundational confidence.
I agree that scaffolding is, non-negotiable. You have to have it. But the architecture of this scaffolding is just too prescriptive. The intense focus on these basic categories, it makes the learner blind the real reason we even talk about clothing. Its connection to our identity, to status, to culture. My main critique starts with the script itself, specifically the reliance on those explicit transactional instructions, the exact commands we just modeled. I mean, telling a listener to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, you're forcing really complex transactional English commands onto an A1, A2 learner. This is language that requires understanding imperatives, phrasal verbs like turn on, dive into, abstract concepts like engagement. This sophisticated vocabulary, it just distracts the beginner from mastering the core subject, trousers, jacket, cotton. It serves a non-linguistic, a commercial agenda, and it models a form of English that is just irrelevant to the stated goal of learning how to describe clothes. And then there's the conceptual gap. Section 22 talks about clothes and personality, and other sections allude to culture, history, and tradition when they bring up a kimono or a sari. But the language provided is just It's completely insufficient to connect those ideas. Simple sentences like, I like simple clothes, can't meaningfully articulate the relationship between a traditional garment and its history. The script sort of gestures towards complexity, but then refuses to provide the actual linguistic tools needed to talk about it.
Okay, this brings us right to a major point of disagreement: the function of that explicit transactional language. You call it a distraction, I call it highly functional, necessary exposure.
But is it appropriate for an A1 learner? My challenge is this. Does that requirement to begin and end the instruction with these non-subject specific commands, does it actually support the goal of learning vocabulary about clothing? We're asking the learner to use up their very limited cognitive resources to master the grammar of a media directive. Something like, before we dive in, please subscribe. Instead of using that same brain power to solidify the difference between denim and wool, it models a mechanical, commercial form of English that just gets in the way of the subject matter.
That's a compelling point about cognitive load, but I'd frame the context differently. I defend those instructions, the CTAs, as necessary examples of transactional English. And that is a key, unavoidable function in the modern world, especially given the medium here. I mean, the script is teaching a set of functional language patterns. If it's okay, like it is in Section 6, to teach phrases like, can I try this on, then modeling online transactional requests is just as valid. A learner consuming digital media in English needs to understand these requests. We aren't just teaching words, we're teaching language for their actual media environment.
I'm just not convinced, because that elevates media literacy above linguistic competency in the actual domain. For a beginner, the priority is fundamentally misplaced. I mean, if we look at the structure of a CTA, it's often a compound sentence that requires understanding a specific sequence, abstract concepts like support the channel. This is complex stuff. The time spent on that meta instruction could be so much better used exploring the practical differences between materials, cotton, wool, leather, or practicing the descriptive structure of an outfit. By putting the CTA on the same level as, say, making a purchase, the script prioritizes media directives over mastering the core vocabulary.
So what you're really arguing is that we should filter real-world English, that we should delay exposure to these functional forms just because they're a bit complex. But a learner needs to understand that instructions and imperatives are a core function of language. If they can process "put on your coat," they can start to process "please subscribe." We have to give them exposure to the full range of high-utility functions. The alternative is creating this sterile environment that just doesn't prepare them for the real world.
And that shifts us perfectly to the second, and I think more substantive issue, this balancing act between functional utility and subject depth. I understand your defense of rigid categories. You argue that focusing on weather or activities is essential because the cognitive links are immediate. A jacket is for cold weather. A uniform is for work. It reinforces utility.
Exactly. Utility is the immediate success metric for a beginner. If they can connect an item to its simple function, they can use the language right away. That builds confidence. It prevents them from getting lost in a sea of abstract ideas.
But this rigid separation creates these artificial walls that actively stop them from thinking synthetically about clothing. I mean, look at how the script handles traditional clothing. A kimono, a kilt, a sari. They're just classified separately, but their use is inherently tied to special days. And at the same time, it's a profound expression of personality and style. By keeping the language so simple, the kimono is traditional clothing, the script completely misses the chance to teach the linguistic tools you'd need to discuss that overlap. A real conversation doesn't stay in one little box. It requires linking those boxes.
Hold on. But those linguistic links, the ability to connect culture, history, personality, that's explicitly B1 and B2 level grammar. We're talking about A1 and A2 learners. They need to master the simple difference between a coat and a t-shirt before they can start discussing why a kilt symbolizes historical clan identity. Applying B1 expectations to A1 learners is a pedagogical error. It leads directly to frustration and burnout. The script, I think, correctly prioritizes mastering high-frequency words over expressing abstract relationships.
I have to disagree that providing the tools to discuss relationships is purely a B1 skill. We are talking about basic causal clauses. The script tells the learner that traditional clothing tells a story about culture, history, and tradition, but then only gives them the vocabulary to say, "It is a red dress." That's not a small gap, that is a conceptual chasm. For a learner to move from just describing something to, meaningful expression, they need structures like, "I chose this outfit because it reflects my casual style," or "the sari is a reflection of Indian culture." The A1 script just lacks the grammar to build those crucial bridges. It gives them the nouns, culture, tradition, but starves them of the verbs and conjunctions needed to actually use them.
But I have to challenge your premise that an A1 script must provide those B1 structures. The step-by-step description method in section 25, start with the main item, add other pieces, add color, add accessories. It's designed to build descriptive competence sequentially. It's a roadmap. If the learner masters those steps with the simple vocabulary, they gain the confidence to integrate more complex ideas later, when they hit B1. We have to start with the simple, functional pour and let complexity emerge organically.
But the control limits the depth of even that simple practice. Take accessories. The script gives you the words watch, necklace, belt, and a simple sentence. She is wearing a silver necklace. But it doesn't offer any way to discuss how that accessory interacts with the rest of the outfit. Why is she wearing sunglasses? To block the sun. Why a belt? To hold up her trousers. The script prevents the use of even simple structures that would link the item to its function. By refusing to bridge that gap between what it is and why it's worn, the communication it models just stays mechanical.
But adding that why too early forces the beginner to wrestle with complex syntax before they're fluent in basic morphology. The risk of error fossilization, where basic grammatical mistakes become permanent, is far too high at the A1 level. The pedagogy here is rooted in the idea that clean, error-free production of simple sentences is the most critical first step. It's slow, it's clear, it's methodical, it's precisely what a beginner needs.
I agree that clean production is essential, but the structural choices here, from the rigid categories to those non-linguistic transactional demands, they lead to a conversation that is often too functional. It sacrifices authenticity for mechanical simplicity. If the goal is clear, confident communication, then learners should be exposed to communication that isn't so heavily dictated by artificial categories and commercial imperatives.
My argument remains that the success of beginner instruction really lies in minimizing ambiguity and maximizing actionable, functional vocabulary. These structured lessons, the focus on verbs, size, color, clear categories, alongside the exposure to explicit instructions, including the transactional framing, it all delivers exactly what the A1-A2 learner needs: immediate, high confidence through clear boundaries and simple, reliable wins.
And I'll concede the absolute need for simplicity for foundational learners. But I maintain that this material's decision to prioritize non-subject-specific transactional demands, at the expense of time that could have been spent linking simple concepts, preparing the student for B1 level discourse, is a structural failure. I believe that a slight strategic increase in complexity could bridge the gap between simple description and meaningful expression of culture and identity much, much earlier. And that would create a significantly more robust foundation for their future learning.
Ultimately, effective language acquisition requires a delicate balance between that structural control, which is designed to prevent mistakes, and the eventual need for nuance that's required for authentic conversation. This material really provides a clear case study of exactly where that pedagogical line gets drawn for a beginner audience.
It certainly forces us to question which form of English we're modeling, the purely commercial and directive, or the genuinely communicative and descriptive, especially when time and cognitive resources are so finite for an A1 learner.
Thank you for joining us for this rigorous analysis of foundational language pedagogy. We hope this discussion has illuminated some of the inherent tensions in designing curriculum for foundational learners.
Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, like, and leave a comment to support the channel.